Chapter 2 Objects and Classes Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051-1. Objects. Everything in Java associated with class and objects, along with attributes and method, is an entity that has state and behavior is known as an object. In real-time car is an object. The car has attributes, such as weight and color, and methods, such as drive and brake. An object is a real-world entity. An object is a runtime entity. An object is an instance of a class. A class is a template or blueprint from which objects are created. So, an object is the instance, result, of a class. Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051-2. Objects. An object has three characteristics. State represents the data, value, of an object. Behavior represents the behavior, functionality, of an object such as deposit, withdraw, etc. Identity. An object identity is typically implemented by a unique ID. The value of the ID is not visible to the external user. However, it is used internally by the JVM to identify each object uniquely. 3. Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051. Objects. In OOP we create software objects that model real-world objects. Software objects are modeled after real-world objects in that they too have state and behavior. A software object maintains its state in one or more variables. A variable is an item of data named by an identifier. A software object implements its behavior with methods. So an object is a software bundle of variables and related methods. An object is also known as an instance. An instance refers to a particular object. For e.g. Beckiel's bicycle is an instance of a bicycle. It refers to a particular bicycle. Tfree is an instance of a student. 4. Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051. Object. The variables of an object are formally known as instance variables. In a running program, there may be many instances of an object. For e.g. there may be many student objects. Each of these objects will have their own instance variables and each object may have different values stored in their instance variables. For e.g. each student object will have a different number stored in its student number variable. 5. Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051. Objects. Objects variables make up the center, or nucleus, of the object. Methods surround and hide the object's nucleus from other objects in the program. Packaging an object's variables within the protective custody of its methods is called encapsulation. Encapsulation has two benefits for software developers. 6. Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051. Objects. Benefits of encapsulation. Modularity. The source code for an object can be written and maintained independently of the source code for other objects. Also, an object can be easily passed around in the system. You can give your bicycle to someone else, and it will still work. Information hiding. An object has a public interface that other objects can use to communicate with it. The object can maintain private information and methods that can be changed at any time without affecting other objects that depend on it. 7. Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051. Classes. A class is a group or collection of objects which have common properties. It is a template or blueprint from which objects are created. It is a logical entity. It can't be physical. Is a software blueprint for objects. Is used to manufacture or create objects. Declares the instance variables necessary to contain the state of every object. So in this case instances variables, a variable which is created inside the class but outside the method. Instance variable doesn't get memory at compile time. It gets memory at runtime when an object or instance is created. So class is a blueprint that defines the variables and the methods common to all objects of a certain kind. Object-Oriented Programming COSC 2051-8. CONT. To create a class, use the keyword class. Syntax. To declare a class, class_name field, method. After creating the class, one can create any number of objects from that class. In Java, classes have the following structure. Access underscore modifier class name / defines class access underscore modifier type variable name / declares class variables. Access underscore modifier return type method name, arguments, / defines class methods return values, / end of method / end of class 9 object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051. Cont. Example myClass.java create a class named myClass with a variable x, public class myClassInts equals 5, another class example, main within the class. In this example, we have created a student class which has two data members ID and name. We are creating the object of the student class by new keyword and printing the object's value. Here, we are creating a main method inside the class. Object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051-10. Cont. Example / Java program to illustrate how to define a class in field / defining a student class. Class student / defining fields in tid / fielder data member or instance a variable string name / creating main method inside the student class public static void main string args / creating gan object or instance students 1 equals new student / creating gan object of student / printing values of t object system.out.println s1.id / accessing member through reference a variable system.out.println s1.name 11 object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051. Classes, example, public class student public string name / student's name public doub latest 1 test 2, test 3 / grades on 3 tests public double jet average / compute average test grade return, test 1 plus test 2 plus test 3 / end of jet average method / end of class student 12 object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051. Cont. It is possible to create multiple object from one class. Example for the class multiple class we can create multiple object from it. Using multiple classes you can also create an object of a class and access it in another class. This is often used for better organization of classes. One class has all the attributes and methods, while the other class holds the main method, code to be executed. 13 Object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051. Types. There are fundamentally two types in Java, primitive types and objects types. Any variable you declare are either declared to be one of the primitive types or an object type. Int doubling array the built-in primitive types in Java. Non-primitives fa are not built-in primitives. They are simply user-defined ones except string types. 14 Object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051. Methods. Methods are mechanisms used to implement operations in classes are called methods. Methods define the behavior of a class and the objects created from the class. A method can send, receive, and alter information to perform a task in an application. Java requires that every method be defined within a class or interface, unlike C++ where methods, functions, can be implemented outside of classes. 15 Object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051. Declaring methods. The full general skeleton declaration used to define a Java method, modifier return type identifier, parameter list, throws exception name method body, the modifier and throws clauses are optional. Modifiers are used to specify how the method needs to be accessed. Throw specifies which exceptions should be checked for. 16 Object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051. Components of method declaration. If one breaks down the method declaration, he/she would find that it performs three main tasks. It determines who may call the method, modifier, it determines what the method can receive, the parameters, it determines how the method returns information, return type, method modifiers. Methods also can be defined using modifiers. Method modifiers only affect how methods are used, not the class they are defined in. Object-oriented programming Co. SC 2051-17. Method modifiers. Here is the complete set of method modifiers: public, protected, private, static, abstract, final. Keep in mind that it doesn't make sense to use some modifiers in one group with modifiers from another group. For example, A method that is defined using the private and abstract modifiers contradicts itself. If a modifier is not used, the method may be accessed only by the classes that are in the current package. Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051-18. Public method declared as public can be accessed by any class in the same package. It can also be accessed by other classes from other packages. This modifier gives a method the most freedom. For example, public void greeting, string name, system.out.println, hello plus name, 19 Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051. Method modifiers protected. Method A method declared as protected can only be used by other classes within the same package. All the subclasses beneath the class the method is defined in may access the method unless shadowing occurs. Shadowing involves naming a method using a name that already exists in a superclass above the class the method is defined in. For example, protected intad, ints inti, intsum, sum equals x plus y, return sum, Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051-20. Method modifiers. Private method. A method declared as private is one that can only be accessed by the class it is defined in. This modifier gives a method the least amount of freedom. Static method. A method declared as static is one that cannot be changed. This type of method is also referred to as a class method, because it belongs explicitly to a particular class. When an instance of the class that defines the method is created, the static method cannot be altered. For this reason, a static method can refer to any other static methods or variables by name. Limitations of static methods to keep in mind are that they cannot be declared as final, and they cannot be overridden. Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051-21. Method modifiers. Abstract method. A method declared as abstract is one that must be defined in a subclass of the current class. However, an abstract method must be declared in the current class with a winky face, semicolon in place of the method's block of code. Methods that are declared abstract are not required to be implemented in every subclass. 22 Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051. Method modifiers. Final method. A method declared as final is one that ends the hierarchical tree. No methods having the same name can be defined in subclasses that exist below the class that declares the method as final. 23 Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051. Return type of a method. Any information that is returned from a method is declared as their turn type. This assures that the information that is returned from a method call will be of correct type, otherwise, a compile time error will be generated. If no information will be returned by a method, the void keyword should be placed in front of the method name. 24 Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051. Parameter lists for a method. The parameter list consists of the ordered set of data elements passed to a method. You can pass 0, 1, or multiple parameters by listing them between the parentheses, with each type and variable name being separated by a comma. If no parameters are passed, the parentheses should be empty. All variables that array passed become local for that instance of the method. 25 Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051. Parameters lists. Here's an example of how methods can be declared with and without parameters. Public static void my first method, string name int number, / the string variable name is assigned whatever is passed to it / the integer variable number is assigned whatever is passed to it. Public static void my first method, / nothing is passed to it. CS_@SLU Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051-26. Method body. All executable code for Java classes is contained in the body of the methods. Unless a method is declared as abstract, the code for the method is placed between a pair of curly braces. This code can be any valid Java statements including variable declarations, assignment statements, method calls, control statements, and so on. 27 Object-Oriented Programming Co-SC 2051. Method body. Here's an example of how a basic method is defined. Public int simple method, int number, / the integer variable number is assigned whatever is passed to it int large equals 1, / local declarations for the method int thy range equals 10, if number lt equals large, return 1, if number gt equals high range, return 100, else return 50. In this case, the method's name is simple method. Because it is declared as public, it can be used by any class in the package in which the method is defined. The return type for the method is int and it accepts only int parameter. The method body contains a few local declarations and a set of if-then decision-making statements. Object-Oriented Programming Co. SC 2051-28. Object messaging software. Objects interact and communicate with each other by sending messages to each other. When Object A wants Object B to perform one of B's methods, Object A sends a message to Object B. There are three parts of a message. The three parts for the message system.out.println, hello world, are the object to which the message is addressed, system.out. The name of the method to perform, println. Any parameters needed by the method, hello world. 29. Object-Oriented Programming Co. SC 2051. Constructors. The special methods define an object's behavior in terms of what operations the object can perform. A constructor, on the other hand, determines how an object is initialized by creating a new instance of a class with specified parameters. Methods and constructors actually differ in three ways. Constructors do not have their own unique names, they must be assigned the same name as their class name. Constructors do not have a return type, not even void. Java assumes that the return type for a constructor is void. Constructors are not inherited by subclasses, as are methods. 30. Object-Oriented Programming Co. SC 2051. Constructors. In calling a constructor, you need to disregard the rules for calling methods. Methods are called directly, constructors are called automatically by Java. When you create a new instance of a class, Java will automatically initialize the object's instance variables, and then call the class's constructors and methods. Defining constructors in a class can do several things, including setting initial values of the instance variables, calling methods based on the initial variables, calling methods from other objects, calculating the initial properties of the object, creating an object that has specific properties outlined in the new argument through overloading. Object-Oriented Programming Co. SC 2051-31. Constructor. Components of a constructor declaration. The basic format for declaring a constructor is constructor modifier, constructor identifier, parameter list, throws / constructor body. Both the modifier and the throws clause are optional. The identifier is the name of the constructor. It is important to remember that the name of the constructor must be the same as the class name it initializes. You may have many constructors, of the same name, in a class, as long as each one takes a different set of parameters. Object-Oriented Programming Co. SC 2051-32. Constructor. Important points about constructor. Constructor name is class name. A constructors must have the same name as the class it's in. Default constructor. If you don't define a constructor for a class, a default parameterless constructor is automatically created by the compiler. The default constructor calls the default parent constructor, super, and initializes all instance variables to default value, 0 for numeric types, null for object references, and false for booleans. Default constructor is created only if there are no constructors. If you define any constructor for your class, no default constructor is automatically created. Differences between methods and constructors. There is no return type given in a constructor signature, header. The value is this object itself, so there is no need to indicate a return value. There is no return statement in the body of the constructor. The first line of a constructor must either be a call on another constructor in the same class, using this, or a call on the superclass constructor, using super. Object-Oriented Programming Co. SC 2051-33. Constructor modifiers. Java provides three modifiers that can be used to define constructors: public, protected, and private. These modifiers have the same restrictions as the modifiers used to declare standard methods. Here is a summary of the guidelines for using modifiers with constructor declarations. A constructor that is declared without the use of one of the modifiers may only be called by one of the classes defined in the same package as the constructor declaration. A constructor that is declared as public may be called from any class that has the ability to access the class containing the constructor declaration. A constructor that is declared as protected may only be called by the subclasses of the class that contains the constructor declaration. A constructor that is declared as private may only be called from within the class it is declared in. Object-Oriented Programming Co. SC 2050-134.